Have you ever woken up in the middle of an ordinary day and felt suddenly, inexplicably hollow, as if you're watching yourself go through motions that once held meaning, but now feel like an elaborate performance? There's a particular kind of emptiness that visits us in the most mundane moments. Standing in line at the grocery store, sitting in traffic, or catching your reflection in a window. It's not depression exactly, nor is it simple boredom. It's the quiet realization that beneath the carefully constructed narrative of your life lies a vast, unnamed wilderness, a territory of existence we've collectively agreed not to discuss. This is the crisis that hides in plain sight, the one we brush against daily but rarely acknowledge. The silent recognition that perhaps we've built our lives around stories that no longer hold true, pursuing purposes we no longer believe in, becoming strangers even to ourselves. We live in an age of unprecedented connection, yet studies show loneliness has reached epidemic proportions. The contradiction isn't coincidental, it's symptomatic of something deeper. Behind closed doors, millions scroll through carefully curated highlights of others' lives while feeling a gnawing sense that something essential is missing from their own. Not something material or achievable, but something fundamental, a disconnect between who we've become and who we sense we might be. The modern world offers endless distractions from this discomfort: productivity as religion, consumption as identity, optimization as purpose. We measure our worth in metrics, followers, likes, promotions, square footage. Yet the algorithms that govern our attention have no capacity to fill the void they help create. They merely provide temporary relief from the question lurking beneath our busyness. What if this isn't enough? What if this isn't even what I want? Psychologists call it existential emptiness, the state of achieving what you thought would fulfill you only to discover it hasn't. The promotion comes, the relationship begins, the goal is reached, yet the anticipated satisfaction remains elusive. Like a horizon that perpetually recedes as you approach it, fulfillment seems to exist just beyond the next achievement. We rarely speak of this disappointment. To do so feels like ingratitude, like failure. Nietzsche wrote of the death of God not merely as a theological statement, but as recognition of our modern predicament. The collapse of shared meaning-making frameworks. Without inherited structures of value, we're left to create meaning individually, a freedom both exhilarating and terrifying. Most terrifying is the possibility that we might fail at this essential task, that we might waste our one wild and precious life pursuing what others have defined as success. The anxiety manifests in seemingly unrelated symptoms: the compulsive checking of phones, the inability to sit in silence, the constant need for validation or distraction. These aren't character flaws, but adaptive responses to an underlying existential unease, attempts to fill a void we can't quite name. The body knows what the mind refuses to acknowledge, that beneath our carefully constructed identities lies uncertainty about whether we're living the right life. This crisis visits us in ordinary moments that suddenly turn extraordinary in their emptiness. The birthday celebration where, surrounded by friends, you feel strangely alone. The achievement that should bring satisfaction, but instead brings the question, is this all? The night you lie awake beside someone you love, yet feel a distance no physical closeness can bridge. These moments aren't failures of gratitude, but glimpses of truth, the recognition that human longing transcends what our culture has taught us to pursue. What makes this crisis particularly painful is its apparent uniqueness. We look around and see others seemingly content with the narratives they've embraced, the paths they follow without question. We wonder, am I the only one who feels this disconnect? This wondering itself becomes another source of isolation. We don't realize that the same question echoes in countless minds, that beneath the surface of ordinary lives runs a current of similar doubt. The philosopher Kierkegaard described this as the sickness unto death, not physical mortality, but the despair of not being one's authentic self. It's the quiet suffering of living at a remove from your own existence, of suspecting you've betrayed something essential about who you are or could be. This betrayal often happens not in dramatic moments of choice, but in the accumulated compromises of ordinary days, the small surrenders that eventually amount to a life that feels somehow not quite your own. The first step toward addressing this crisis is simply acknowledging its existence, recognizing that the emptiness isn't a personal failing, but a universal human experience, perhaps even a necessary one. There's a particular kind of courage required to stand in this uncomfortable awareness without immediately trying to escape it, to say, yes, I feel this void, this disconnect, this uncertainty. And perhaps within that acknowledgement lies the beginning of a different kind of journey. We are born into stories already in progress, narratives about success, happiness, purpose, and meaning that we absorb before we're old enough to question them. Family expectations, cultural ideals, religious frameworks, national mythologies, these become the invisible architecture of our understanding. We navigate life according to maps we didn't draw, pursuing destinations chosen for us rather than by us. The crisis emerges when we begin to suspect these maps may not lead where we truly wish to go. Albert Camus wrote that, "At any street corner, the feeling of absurdity can strike any man in the face." This absurdity, the gap between our desire for meaning and the universe's silence, isn't something we encounter once and resolve. It's a recurring recognition, a persistent tension. We create elaborate systems of meaning to shelter us from this awareness, but these shelters are more fragile than we care to admit. A diagnosis, a betrayal, a pandemic, and suddenly the illusion of certainty dissolves. Consider the quiet desperation of the successful executive who, having climbed every ladder placed before her, wonders why the view from the top feels so empty. Or the parent who fulfills every responsibility, yet feels a nameless grief for a self left behind. Or the student who excels at every test, yet cannot answer the most important question: what do I actually want? These aren't failures of achievement, but failures of imagination. The inability to conceive of fulfillment outside inherited definitions of success. Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming psychologically individual, distinct from collective identity. This journey requires confronting what he called the shadow, aspects of ourselves we've rejected or denied to maintain our self-image or social acceptance. The existential crisis often begins here, in the growing awareness of our unlived life, the roads not taken, the authentic self sacrificed at the altar of expectation or security. The particular cruelty of our age is that we're simultaneously told we can be anything while being shown very narrow definitions of what's worth being. Social media doesn't just connect us, it standardizes our aspirations, homogenizes our definitions of the good life. We scroll through carefully filtered images that become the measure against which we judge our unfiltered reality. The result is a peculiar form of suffering, the sense that everyone else has discovered the secret to fulfillment, while we alone remain on the outside. Viktor Frankl, having survived the concentration camps, concluded that the primary human drive is not pleasure or power, but meaning. The need to believe our suffering serves some purpose, that our existence matters in some way. Yet meaning isn't something we find like a hidden treasure. It's something we create through how we choose to interpret and respond to our circumstances. The crisis comes when we realize no one can create this meaning for us, not parents, partners, institutions, or ideologies. There's a particular kind of vertigo that accompanies this realization, the dizzying awareness of your absolute freedom and responsibility. Sartre called it nausea, this visceral recognition that beneath all our explanations and justifications lies radical choice. We are condemned to freedom, to authoring our own meaning in a universe indifferent to our need for purpose. No wonder we often flee from this awareness into the comfort of certainty, even when that certainty no longer serves us. The philosopher Martin Heidegger spoke of thrownness, the fact that we find ourselves already in a world, in particular circumstances, with specific limitations not of our choosing. Yet within this thrownness lies the possibility of authentic existence, not in escaping our circumstances, but in choosing our relationship to them. The crisis becomes an invitation when we recognize that while we didn't choose our beginning, we can participate in writing what comes next. What makes this journey so difficult is that it requires a particular kind of courage, not the dramatic bravery celebrated in stories, but the quiet fortitude to question what everyone around you takes for granted, to stand in uncertainty when certainty offers comfort, to risk the disapproval of those whose acceptance has defined your sense of worth, to face the possibility that you've been living according to a script that was never truly yours. There's a moment often arriving without warning when the narrative cracks. Perhaps it's triggered by loss, by achievement that fails to satisfy, by a chance encounter that disrupts your carefully maintained worldview. Whatever the catalyst, something shifts. The stories you've told yourself about who you are and what matters begin to unravel. This unraveling, painful as it is, contains a hidden invitation, the chance to weave something new, something truer. Kierkegaard described 3 stages of existence: the aesthetic, living for pleasure and immediate gratification; the ethical, living according to moral duties and social expectations; and the religious, living in relation to something transcendent. Regardless of one's theological beliefs, this framework illuminates a universal progression from seeking satisfaction in external sources to finding it in commitment to something beyond oneself. The crisis often marks the transition between these stages, the growing awareness that what once satisfied no longer does. Consider how often transformation begins not with inspiration, but with disruption. The job loss that forces reconsideration of career identity. The health scare that clarifies priorities. The relationship ending that reveals dependency mistaken for love. These ruptures, while painful, create opening spaces where new possibilities can emerge. The question becomes not, how do I get back to normal, but what new normal might I create? There's a particular quality to this awakening, a simultaneous sense of loss and liberation. Loss of the certainties that once provided comfort. Liberation from limitations you'd accepted without question. Like a prisoner so accustomed to confinement that freedom feels disorienting, you may find yourself longing for the very constraints you've outgrown. This ambivalence is not weakness, but wisdom, the recognition that growth requires both letting go and reaching forward. The psychiatrist Irvin Yalom identifies 4 ultimate concerns that underlie existential anxiety: death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness. Each represents a fundamental condition of existence we must confront. Yet within each threat lies opportunity. Awareness of death heightens appreciation for life. Recognition of freedom enables authentic choice. Acknowledgement of isolation deepens capacity for genuine connection. Confrontation with meaninglessness allows creation of personal meaning. This awakening rarely happens all at once. More often, it's a gradual dawn, moments of clarity interspersed with returns to familiar patterns. You might recognize the limitations of your current path on Tuesday, then throw yourself back into old pursuits by Thursday. This isn't failure, but the natural rhythm of transformation: 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The path isn't linear, but spiral, returning to similar questions at deeper levels of understanding. What distinguishes this crisis from simple unhappiness is the element of possibility it contains. Beneath the discomfort lies a question. What if this dissatisfaction isn't pointing toward what's wrong, but toward what's possible? What if the emptiness is not an absence, but a space being cleared for something new? The very questioning becomes a creative act, the beginning of authoring rather than merely following a life story. There's a subtle shift that occurs in this stage from asking, "What do I want?" to "Who am I becoming?" The first question, while important, remains within the framework of consumption and acquisition. The second opens into the territory of transformation, of potential rather than possession. It acknowledges that fulfillment comes not from having particular experiences, but from developing particular qualities of being. This awakening doesn't guarantee happiness in the conventional sense. In fact, it may initially increase suffering as you become more aware of contradictions previously ignored. But it offers something perhaps more valuable: aliveness. The difference between existing and living, between going through motions and being fully present to your one irreplaceable life. As Thoreau wrote, "To be awake is to be alive," and many walk through life in a kind of waking sleep, never fully conscious of their own existence. There exists a particular kind of strength that our culture rarely celebrates. Not the strength of achievement or dominance, but the strength of endurance, of continuing to seek meaning, even when certainty has been lost. This resilience doesn't announce itself with declarations or displays. It manifests in small, daily choices. The decision to remain open rather than cynical, to keep questioning rather than settle for comfortable answers, to face reality without surrendering to despair. Consider the quiet courage of the person who, having recognized that their chosen path no longer serves them, begins again, not with the confidence of youth, but with the hard-earned wisdom of experience. Or the one who, facing irreversible loss, finds ways to create meaning from suffering rather than being defined by it. These journeys rarely make headlines, yet they represent profound acts of human dignity and determination. Frankl observed in the concentration camps that those most likely to survive weren't necessarily the physically strongest, but those who maintained a sense of purpose, whether reuniting with loved ones or completing unfinished work. "Those who have a why to live," he wrote, quoting Nietzsche, "can bear almost any how." This insight applies not just to extreme circumstances, but to ordinary existence. Meaning doesn't eliminate suffering, but makes it bearable, even transformative. This resilience often develops not despite vulnerability, but because of it. Having faced the abyss, the recognition of mortality, meaninglessness, or profound loss, you discover resources within yourself previously unknown. The Japanese art of kintsugi repairs broken pottery with gold, treating breakage as part of an object's history rather than something to disguise. Similarly, a life that has confronted and integrated its fractures often emerges stronger, more authentic, more beautiful in its acknowledged imperfection. There's a particular kind of freedom that comes from surviving what you thought would destroy you. Having faced your deepest fears of failure, abandonment, meaninglessness, death. They lose some of their power over you, not because they're no longer frightening, but because you've proven to yourself that you can feel fear without being defined by it. This is not fearlessness, but courage, the capacity to act in alignment with your values even when afraid. The philosopher and psychologist William James distinguished between once-born and twice-born individuals. The once-born move through life relatively untouched by existential questions, finding satisfaction within conventional frameworks. The twice-born undergo a crisis that necessitates psychological rebirth, the construction of new meaning after old certainties have collapsed. This second birth is rarely easy, but produces a more examined, authentic existence. What sustains this journey is not blind optimism, but what might be called tragic optimism, the capacity to remain open to joy and meaning while fully acknowledging life's pain and limitations. It's the recognition that meaning exists not despite suffering, but often through our response to it. As Camus suggested, we must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because his burden has been lifted, but because he has found purpose in the carrying. This resilience manifests in ordinary moments that become extraordinary through attention. The capacity to find wonder in what remains after loss, to create beauty in constrained circumstances, to offer generosity despite personal lack. It's the parent who, while struggling with their own doubts, creates space for a child's questions. The artist who transforms pain into creation. The friend who sits with another's suffering without trying to fix or flee from it. Perhaps most importantly, this strength includes the capacity to begin again, not once, but many times. To wake each morning and choose engagement over resignation, curiosity over certainty, creation over consumption. To recognize, as Beckett wrote, that the task is to fail better, to approach life not as a problem to be solved, but as a reality to be experienced, with all its contradictions and complexities intact. There comes a point in the journey through existential crisis when something unexpected emerges, not the resolution you may have sought, but a different kind of peace. Not the peace of answers, but the peace of deeper questions. Not the elimination of uncertainty, but a growing capacity to dwell within it, even to discover its hidden gifts. This is the paradoxical illumination that can emerge from fully entering the darkness rather than fleeing from it. The psychiatrist Carl Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This making conscious, this willingness to see clearly without flinching, becomes itself a path. Not away from difficulty, but through it. The crisis that began as disruption reveals itself as initiation, a threshold crossing from an unconscious to a more conscious life, from inherited values to chosen ones, from security to authenticity. Consider how many wisdom traditions incorporate some form of darkness or dissent. Jonah in the whale, Buddha under the Bodhi tree, Christ in the wilderness. These aren't merely stories of suffering, but of transformation through encounter with what has been denied, rejected, or feared. Your own journey through existential questioning follows this ancient pattern, the necessary descent that precedes genuine rebirth. What gradually becomes clear is that the crisis itself contains wisdom, that your dissatisfaction with superficial answers reflects not failure, but integrity. Your questioning, not weakness, but strength. The very qualities that make conventional existence difficult, sensitivity, depth, the need for meaning beyond material success, become recognized not as liabilities, but as essential aspects of your humanity. Perhaps even your particular gifts to offer. There's a subtle but profound shift that occurs, from seeking fulfillment through addition to discovering it, through subtraction removing what isn't essential rather than accumulating more. From pursuing happiness as a future state to recognizing moments of presence, connection, and meaning already available. From asking, "What will make me happy?" to, "What is already here that I've been too preoccupied to notice?" The philosopher Simone Weil wrote that, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." This quality of attention to your own experience, to others, to the world around you, becomes both practice and reward, not a means to an end, but a way of being that transforms ordinary moments. The sunset isn't more beautiful than before, but you are more present to its beauty. The conversation isn't more meaningful, but you bring more meaning through your listening. What emerges isn't the elimination of darkness, but a changed relationship to it. The recognition that light and dark, joy and sorrow, connection and solitude are not opponents, but partners in the creation of a fully lived life. That wisdom comes not from transcending human limitations, but from fully embracing them. That vulnerability, far from being weakness, is the precondition for genuine connection, creativity, and love. This integration doesn't happen once, but continuously. The existential questions don't disappear, but become companions rather than tormentors. How shall I live? Becomes not a problem to solve, but an invitation to respond creatively to each day, each circumstance, each relationship. The burden of freedom, the necessity of choice without certainty, becomes recognized also as gift, the very condition that makes meaning possible. What you discover, finally, is not the purpose of life in abstract terms, but your purpose in living it, the particular way your unique combination of gifts, wounds, circumstances, and values allows you to contribute. Not through grand gestures necessarily, but through the quality of presence you bring to ordinary interactions, the values you embody in daily choices, the care with which you attend to what has been entrusted to you. Purpose, not as destination, but as direction, not as achievement, but as approach. Perhaps the most profound discovery in this journey is that the crisis itself was not an interruption of your life's meaning, but an essential part of its creation. The questioning, the emptiness, the disorientation, these were not detours, but the path itself, not obstacles to your becoming, but the very forge in which a more authentic self was being shaped. The darkness was not the absence of light, but, as the poet Theodore Roethke wrote, a kind of light of its own. What remains is not certainty, but something more valuable, the capacity to create meaning even in uncertainty, to find purpose not despite, but through limitation, to discover connection even in solitude. You emerge not with answers that eliminate questions, but with questions that generate ongoing life questions that don't diminish with time, but continue to unfold new dimensions of meaning, new possibilities for response. The crisis no one talks about becomes, paradoxically, the experience that enables genuine conversation with yourself, with others walking similar paths, with the mystery of existence itself. Having faced what most fear to name, you find yourself able to listen without defense, to speak without pretense, to be present without performance. This authenticity becomes itself a quiet gift to a world starved for genuine encounter. In the end, what transforms is not circumstances, but perception, the recognition that meaning isn't something found, but something created through how you choose to see and respond to what life offers. The emptiness that once terrified reveals itself as spaciousness, the uncertainty as possibility, the aloneness as the ground of genuine connection. You haven't eliminated the abyss, but learned to build your house alongside it, neither denying its presence nor defined by its emptiness. And so you continue, not because all questions have been answered or all doubts resolved, but because you've discovered something more sustaining than certainty, the capacity to remain open in the face of mystery, to create meaning even in limitation, to offer presence even in impermanence. This is not the end of questioning, but its maturation from desperate seeking to curious exploration, from the demand for answers to the embrace of wonder. The crisis becomes not conclusion, but threshold, not ending, but beginning, the starting point of a more conscious, chosen, an authentic life. As the light fades and these words settle into the spaces between your thoughts, remember this: your existential questioning isn't weakness, it's your humanity reaching for something real in a world of illusions. The very pain that feels like isolation is your connection to every soul who has ever looked up at the stars and whispered, "Is this all?" Your doubts are not the absence of wisdom, but its beginning. And in those quiet moments when you feel most lost, you are not failing at life. You are finally beginning to live it. Perhaps our wounds are not merely damage, but doorways, not just our breaking, but our opening. So carry your questions gently, wear your uncertainty like a badge of courage, and know that in your darkest nights, you have never been more awake, more authentic, or less alone. This journey through the darkness doesn't just change what you see, it transforms who sees. If something in this journey resonated with your own unspoken questions, I invite you to share a fragment of your story in the comments below. What part of this hidden crisis have you experienced? What meaning have you created from your own darkness? Your voice matters here. This space is for those brave enough to speak the truths we rarely share. And if these words have become a companion on your path, consider subscribing to join a community of fellow travelers asking the questions that matter. Together, perhaps we can learn to navigate the darkness with a little more grace, a little more courage, and a lot less loneliness. Thank you for the profound gift of your attention, for bringing your whole self to these moments we've shared. Your presence here matters more than you know.